January 1944. Westward Ho, Devon, England. A crowd of senior British military officers stood on a beach waiting to watch the weapon that would crack the Atlantic Wall. What they watched instead was two rocket-powered wheels, 10 feet across, break free from their intended path, veer sideways across the sand, and chase the observers in 3 different directions. 29 rockets, 0 successful runs. The weapon was canceled the same week. That is number 16 on this list. And number 6, a flying wing built from wood and charcoal glue in 1944, was formally analyzed in 2008 by the company that manufactures the B-2 stealth bomber. They published what they found. These weapons did not vanish because they failed. Someone decided they should. Let's begin. Number 25. Kugelpanzer Sphere Tank. There is exactly one of these in the world. The Kugelpanzer Sphere Tank is a single-occupant armored vehicle shaped like a rounded cylinder currently held at the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia. Soviet forces captured it in Manchuria in 1945. No documentation of its intended use has been confirmed. No production records. No operational reports. The armor is 6 millimeters thick, enough to stop small arms at distance, nothing more. 1 vision slit, 1 entrance hatch. Its origin, purpose, and designer remain unconfirmed to this day. This is not mythology. It is simply the absence of documentation where documentation should exist. Number 24. Goliath Tracked Mine. It weighed roughly 90 kilograms and looked like a child's toy. The Goliath was a small, tracked demolition vehicle controlled by a thin wire loaded with 60 to 100 kilograms of explosive, designed to crawl toward a target and destroy it. Germany produced over 7,000 units. In practice, the wire was the problem. A single bullet or piece of shrapnel cut it, and the Goliath stopped permanently wherever it sat. Allied soldiers learned quickly: shoot the wire, not the vehicle. A weapon produced in the thousands, used across multiple fronts, and neutralized by a single rifle round. Number 23. V-1 Reichenberg. The V-1 was already a flying bomb. The Reichenberg was the same aircraft with a cockpit added, a one-way weapon that required a human pilot to guide it to the target. Germany trained over 100 volunteers. The project was real. The pilots were real. But the Reichenberg never flew a combat mission. By the time the program reached operational readiness in late 1944, Germany had lost air superiority. A slow, low-flying piloted bomb needed fighter cover it couldn't get. The volunteers trained for months for a mission that was never ordered. Number 22. Hafthollandung. This was a tank killer you carried in your hand. The Hafthollandung was a shaped charged magnetic mine, roughly the size of a large bowl, designed to be placed directly on tank armor by a soldier close enough to touch the vehicle. It penetrated up to 140 millimeters of steel, enough to destroy any Allied tank of the period. The problem was obvious. Getting close enough to use it meant crossing ground that a tank crew was actively trying to defend. Late-war German infantry carried these as a last resort, not a strategy. Number 21. SDKFZ 302 Goliath. Before the wire-controlled version, Germany built this. The earlier Goliath used an electric motor powered by 2 lead-acid batteries, giving it a range of roughly 1.5 kilometers. It was quiet, relatively fast for its size, and mechanically simple. Production was expensive. Each unit cost the equivalent of a small vehicle. The battery-powered version gave way to a cheaper petrol model, but both variants shared the same fatal limitation. Any damage to the control cable ended the mission immediately. The world's first mass-produced remote combat vehicle was defeated by the same problem that still haunts modern drone warfare: the signal link. Number 20. Type 4 20cm rocket launcher. Japan built fewer than 100 of these. The Type 4 was a rocket launcher designed to fire a 20cm spin-stabilized rocket at Allied landing craft and beach positions. It was large, difficult to move, and required a crew of several men to operate. The Imperial Japanese Army produced it in 1944, too late and in too small a number to affect any major engagement. Most units were assigned to coastal defense positions that Allied forces bypassed entirely using island-hopping strategy. It never fired in defense of a position that mattered. Number 19. Krummlauf. Number 19. Stop here for a moment. Everything on this list so far has been strange, wasteful, or ahead of its time. Number 19 is different. Number 19 is about what it costs to fight a war inside a building. By 1943, German infantry were dying in a specific, terrible way. Not in open fields, in rooms, in stairwells, in the rubble of Stalingrad and Ortona and Casino. Soldiers pressed their backs against walls because the moment they leaned out, they were dead. The corners were killing them. The Krummlauf was the answer. A curved barrel attachment for the Sturmgewehr 44, bent at 30 or 45 degrees with a small periscope so the shooter never had to expose himself. You could fire around a corner and never show your face. It worked. It also wore out after roughly 300 rounds. The mechanical stress on the bent barrel was extreme. The soldiers who used it knew it was fragile. They used it anyway. The Krummlauf was never scaled to mass production. Tooling costs were too high for a war economy running out of everything, so it stayed rare and the corners kept killing people. Number 18. Rotkäppchen missile. The Rotkäppchen, the Little Red Riding Hood, was an early German wire-guided anti-tank missile tested in 1944, capable of being steered to its target after launch by an operator with a control unit and a thin trailing wire. The concept was correct. Modern anti-tank guided missiles still use variants of the same principle. The Rotkäppchen reached test stage and no further. Procurement officials chose to invest remaining resources in conventional artillery systems they already understood. The wire guidance technology that Germany developed and then abandoned was operational in Western armies by the mid-1950s. Number 17. Fritz X. On September 9, 1943, a German Dornier 217 bomber released a Fritz X from high altitude over the Mediterranean. The bomb fell for 43 seconds. A radio operator guided it by joystick. It struck the Italian battleship Roma directly, penetrated the deck, and detonated in the ammunition magazine. The Roma sank in 20 minutes. 1,352 men died. It was the first time in history that a precision-guided weapon sank a warship in combat. Allied intelligence classified Fritz X research immediately after the war. The engineers behind it were among those transferred under Operation Paperclip. The weapon that sank a battleship in 43 seconds was too useful to let the public know it existed. Number 16. Panjandrum. The British military needed to crack the Atlantic Wall. Their solution was a pair of enormous wooden wheels, 10 feet across, connected by an axle packed with explosives and driven by dozens of attached rockets. The idea? roll it up the beach, hit the wall, detonate. It worked perfectly in the lab. On the test beach at Horten Ho in January 1944, the rockets ignited unevenly, the wheels veered sideways, and the entire device spun toward a crowd of senior military observers. No one was hit. The weapon was cancelled the same week. 29 rockets, 2 wheels, and 0 successful runs, and yet the Atlantic Wall held until conventional engineers blew holes in it with methods that had existed since the First World War. Number 15. V-3 Supergun. The V-3 was not a rocket, it was a gun, a 500-foot-long multi-chamber cannon buried at an angle into a hillside in Mimoyec in northern France, designed to fire fin-stabilized shells into London at a rate of 600 rounds per hour. The engineering was credible. Sequential explosive charges along the barrel would accelerate each shell beyond anything conventional artillery could achieve. Allied photo reconnaissance identified the site. RAF bombers using tall boy deep penetration bombs destroyed the installation in July 1944 before it fired a single operational shot. The gun that could have hit London from France was put out of action by the same delivery problem it was trying to solve. Number 14. Soviet Ampulomet. The Red Army in 1941 had a supply problem. It needed to defend positions with whatever was available. The Ampulomet was the result, a mortar-like device that launched glass spheres filled with a self-igniting incendiary compound called KS, a mixture of white phosphorus and carbon disulfide. It was cheap, it was simple, it was dangerous to the crew if the spheres cracked before launch. Soviet infantry used it in the desperate defensive battles of 1941 and 1942 when conventional anti-tank weapons were unavailable in sufficient numbers. Improvised incendiary weapons had been a constant of infantry warfare. The Ampulomet was simply more honest about what it was. Number 13. Kugelblitz. Germany in late 1944 needed an anti-aircraft vehicle that could engage low-flying ground attack aircraft. Existing vehicles were too slow-firing. The Kugelblitz combined two 30mm Mk-103 autocannons in a fully enclosed, rotating spherical turret mounted on a Panzer IV chassis. 2 prototypes were completed. The rate of fire and targeting speed represented a significant advance over the Wirbelwind and Ostwind that preceded it. Wehrmacht procurement ordered 5 to be completed monthly. Production never began. By the time the Kugelblitz reached prototype stage, the Panzer IV production line was being redirected to a priority that headquarters considered more urgent: more Panzer IVs. Number 12. Henschel HS 293. What you're about to hear changes how you watch the rest of this list. The Henschel HS 293 was the first air-launched guided missile used in combat. Not a concept, not a test. Operational from August 1943 against Allied convoys in the Bay of Biscay. It sank ships. Confirmed kills include HMS Egret on August 27, 1943, the first warship ever destroyed by a guided missile. That is an entry in the Royal Navy's own loss records. Here's what happened after the war. The engineers who designed the HS 293 were recruited by the United States under Operation Paperclip. Their guidance systems, control electronics, and aerodynamic research transferred directly into American post-war weapons programs. The National Archives, records of the Army Air Forces, document the transfers explicitly. The military establishment that spent 2 years trying to defeat the HS 293 spent the next decade building on it, without telling anyone where the knowledge came from. This is the pattern. The weapons were not buried because they failed. They were buried because they succeeded, and because the people who succeeded were on the wrong side of a line. Remember that when you get to number 6. Number 11. Mistel composite aircraft. The idea was straightforward. Strip the cockpit out of a bomber, pack it with explosives, and attach a fighter on top. The fighter pilot flies the combination to the target, aims the bomber at it, releases, and escapes. The bomber becomes the weapon. Germany flew Mistel combinations operationally from 1944 onward, primarily using a Focke-Wulf 190 mounted above a modified Junkers 88. The warhead carried over 3,000 kilograms of shaped explosive, enough to destroy a hardened structure or a large ship. Results were mixed. The system was slow, difficult to fly in formation, and highly vulnerable to fighter interception. But the concept of a crewed launch platform releasing an uncrewed strike vehicle was not wrong. It's now called a standoff weapon. Number 10. BA-349 Natter. His name was Lothar Sieber. On February 28, 1945, he was 22 years old. He climbed into a BA-349 Natter at a test site near Backnang, Germany, not for a combat mission, but for the first manned vertical launch test. The rocket ignited. The Natter climbed vertically at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. 37 seconds after launch, the canopy separated without warning. Sieber lost consciousness. The aircraft impacted the ground at full speed. The BA-349 had been designed to be disposable. The pilot was not supposed to be. After engine burnout, the aircraft was intended to separate at altitude. The pilot parachuting free, the nose section recovered separately. Sieber died because a mechanical failure in a system designed to save him failed at the worst possible moment. 10 more test flights followed. The Natter was declared operational in April 1945. It never intercepted an Allied aircraft. Number 9. Flettner F-1 282 Kolibri. The Flettner Fi-282 was not experimental in the sense of unproven. It was the world's first helicopter to enter series production. Germany built 24 of them, using an intermeshing twin-rotor design that eliminated the need for a tail rotor and made the aircraft unusually stable. The German Navy used it operationally for convoy reconnaissance in the Baltic and Mediterranean. It performed well. The Bavarian Motor Works facility building the Kolibri was destroyed by Allied bombing in 1944, ending production. After the war, the United States Army Air Forces took 3 surviving examples for evaluation. The intermeshing rotor design that Flettner pioneered reappears in the Cayman K-Mex, still in production today. Number 8. Soviet Flying Tank A-40. In 1942, Soviet engineer Oleg Antonov attached a biplane glider frame to a T-60 light tank. The tank's engine drove its tracks. A towing aircraft was supposed to pull the combination to altitude, release it, and the tank would glide to a landing zone, shed the wings, and immediately engage. It flew. On September 2, 1942, a test flight successfully demonstrated that the concept was aerodynamically viable. The towing aircraft, an underpowered Tupolev TB-3, overheated and had to release the glider tank early. The pilot landed safely. The project was cancelled because no Soviet aircraft in service was powerful enough to tow a T-60 to combat altitude with a meaningful fuel reserve remaining. The tank that could fly existed for exactly one test flight and one very specific engineering reason. Number 7. Ruhrstahl X-4. The X-4 was designed to solve a specific problem. How do you shoot down a bomber formation from outside the range of its defensive guns? The answer was a wire-guided air-to-air rocket with a warhead large enough to destroy a 4-engine bomber controlled by the launching fighter pilot after release. Testing proved the concept sound. The X-4 was ready for production in early 1945. The primary fuel for its rocket motor was a compound called Visol, manufactured at the Buna synthetic rubber plant in Skopau. On March 28, 1945, Allied bombers destroyed the Buna plant. Production of the X-4 stopped the same week. The missile designed to destroy Allied bombers was stopped by Allied bombers. Number 6. Horten Ho 229. What follows is not speculation. In 2008, Northrop Grumman, the company that builds the B-2 stealth bomber, formally analyzed the Horten Ho 229 airframe held at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center. They measured its radar cross-section using materials analysis and computational modeling. The result? The Ho 229's leading edges, coated in carbon-impregnated plywood composite, reduced radar reflection compared to conventional aluminum aircraft of the same period. The Horten brothers had embedded charcoal dust in the wing's adhesive layer. Northrop Grumman's own engineers concluded the Ho 229 would have been measurably harder to detect on early Allied radar than a conventional fighter. The B-2 first flew in 1989. It uses a flying wing design. The Horten brothers built a flying wing in 1944. This is not a claim that the Ho 229 was a stealth aircraft. This is a documented engineering finding by the manufacturer of the B-2, showing that a German aircraft built from wood and glue shared a fundamental characteristic with the most advanced bomber on Earth. That is a Northrop Grumman technical report. You can read it. Number 5. Landkreuzer P-1000 Ratte. In 1942, Krupp submitted a proposal for a land battleship. The P-1000 Ratte would weigh 1,000 tons, stretch 35 meters in length, carry 2 naval gun turrets, each housing 2 80mm guns, and require a crew of over 200 men. Hitler approved the project in 1942. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, cancelled it in 1943. His reasoning, documented in post-war interrogation records: no bridge in Europe could support it, no road could bear it, and every Allied aircraft with a bomb could see it from altitude. The P-1000 never moved beyond concept drawings, but the resources allocated to preliminary design work, steel, engineering time, production planning, came directly out of a war economy that was already failing to produce enough tanks, guns, and ammunition for the men dying on the Eastern Front. The Ratte was not a weapon. It was the engineering manifestation of a command structure that had lost contact with reality, and the institutional inability to say no to it cost lives that were never counted. Number 4. Landkreuzer P-1500 Monster. If the Ratte was excess, the Monster was its logical conclusion. The P-1500 would have weighed 1,500 tons. Its primary armament was the Schwer Gustav railway gun, the largest artillery piece ever built, mounted on a self-propelled chassis. The Gustav required a crew of 2,000 men and a dedicated railway line just to move it. The P-1500 proposed to make it mobile without the railway. The engineering required to achieve this did not exist. The materials required did not exist. The fuel consumption was never seriously calculated because no realistic calculation was possible. It existed on paper in 1943. Nothing else was ever built. Number 3. Vortex Cannon. This is where the list requires a clear statement. What follows is not confirmed by combat documentation. German engineers during the war investigated the theoretical possibility of using compressed air, formed into a focused vortex, to destabilize aircraft at close range. The concept appears in post-war Allied intelligence reports. Physical prototypes of small-scale vortex-generating devices were reportedly found and tested by Allied engineers after the war. No combat deployment has been documented. No Allied aircraft loss has been attributed to a vortex weapon. The post-war tests showed that achieving the air pressures required to affect a large aircraft at any practical range was beyond what available technology could deliver. The Vortex cannon may have been a real research program. It was not a real weapon. The distinction matters because this list has shown you what real experimental weapons looked like, and this is not one of them. Ask yourself what else on this list sits in the same category, and ask yourself how you would know. Number 2. Die Glocke, the bell. There is no verified document that proves this existed. That sentence is important. There is no verified primary source document, no design drawing, no test report, no eyewitness account corroborated by physical evidence that confirms the existence of a project called Die Glocke, the bell. What exists is this: a single post-war account from a Polish journalist and researcher named Igor Witomski, published in 2000, describing a device he claimed to have learned about from classified Polish intelligence files he was never allowed to reproduce. Nick Cook, an aviation journalist, popularized the account in 2001. It grew from there. The story describes a bell-shaped device, 2 to 3 meters in diameter, filled with a substance called Serum-525, generating fields that killed nearby test subjects and possibly bent space-time. No Serum-525 has ever been identified or chemically analyzed. No test site has been confirmed. No engineer who worked on it has been identified by name in any verifiable document. Here is the actual question: not whether it was real, but why stories like this exist. Every war produces classified programs. Every classified program produces rumors. The Third Reich's genuine experimental weapons, and you've seen dozens of them tonight, were strange enough, advanced enough, and real enough that the space for mythology is enormous. Die Glocke fills that space. It says there was something even bigger, even more secret, even more impossible that you will never know about. Maybe. The documents don't exist. An absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it is also not evidence of presence. Number 1. Sun Gun Sonnengewehr. On July 23, 1945, Life magazine published a story. The headline: German scientists had planned to build a space station 100 miles above the Earth, carrying a concave mirror 1 mile across, capable of focusing sunlight onto a single point on the surface below. This was not speculation. Life magazine was reporting on actual German aerospace research documents captured after the war. The concept originated with Hermann Oberth, one of the founders of modern rocketry, who had proposed a space mirror as early as 1923. Wartime engineers at the Peenemünde had produced calculations suggesting such a mirror could be constructed, theoretically, using materials then available. The United States Army was studying those documents when Life published the article. They knew what they had. The Sun Gun was never built. The engineering gap between the concept and anything achievable was enormous. The space program to reach the station alone would require technology that didn't exist until the 1960s. But the physics was not wrong. The United States Navy's high-energy laser with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance system, Helios, achieved first light in 2020. The Army's Directed Energy Maneuver Short-Range Air Defense Program, DM-SHORAD, is operational on Stryker vehicles. Both are energy weapons. Neither is a space mirror. But the fundamental idea, concentrate energy, deliver it precisely to a distant target, is the same idea that appeared in a Life magazine article in the summer of 1945. The engineers who imagined the Sun Gun did not get to build it. The principle did not disappear with them. they did not forget it. They took it with them. I spent months on this list. What stayed with me was not how strange these weapons were. It was how many of them worked and how completely they disappeared anyway. 25 weapons. Some failed on the test range. Some were canceled by the same institutions that commissioned them. Some were buried, transferred, and rebuilt under different names by the people who defeated them. The engineering did not die. The credit did. Which of these weapons would have changed the outcome of the war if it had reached full production? And which of them should have stayed buried and didn't? Leave your answer below. And if this is the kind of history no one talks about anymore, subscribe, because there is more of it.